think in this video about Paradise Lost Book 9 and the argument and the opening lines where we see Milton's narration. So in Paradise Lost Book 9 we start off with an argument before Milton moves into some of his own narration. And as with all of his other books, this argument summarises exactly what's going to happen in this book. So in this argument he describes how Satan will tempt Eve and she in turn will persuade Adam to follow her into sin and death. Now it's worth remembering for our context that John Milton published Paradise Lost in 1667, but he had to revise it in 1674, which is the edition that most of us have, where he divides the original 10 books into the 12 that we see and adds the introductory summaries, or the arguments as he calls them, for each book at the request of confused early readers. So he just wanted to make it clear to everyone what was going on, and these arguments were added in later on. And then in lines 1 to 47 we hear from Milton himself in his narrative where he explains that his notes are turning tragic. So we have an intercession or an interjection from Milton, and he does this at the start of lots of other books. So he refers to his own blindness at the start of book 3. He talks about the current political climate of England at the start of other books. And in this one in particular he compares his work to other epics and heroic tales and justifies why he's written it as he has. So let's have a look at our first key quotation from lines 5 to 6, where Milton writes, "I must now change these notes to tragic." So in the start of this book, Milton's narrative voice is dominant, and we're reminded of book 1 at the very start of book 1, where he makes his purpose clear. He intends to justify the ways of God to man. And the fact that Milton makes it very clear that he himself is the narrator does profoundly deepen his connection, or the Paradise Lost's connection, to his own personal, political, philosophical and personal struggles. So we cannot separate the text Paradise Lost from the author, from the writer. And we have the two connotations of tragic here. So the first, tragedy, meaning something bad or unfortunate, and this indicates a shift in his content and tone. So in the previous books, Milton's described the prelapsarian world, and in book 9 this is where we shift to this post-lapsarian world full of sin. But tragic also has another meaning which we can link to the literary context of tragedy, which was obviously formalised by Aristotle. And we can see that underlying tragic structure of Paradise Lost. We have a noble hero who is perhaps Adam, who has a tragic flaw, and according to C.S. Lewis, that's his uxoriousness, his love for Eve. He then has to face the consequences of this flaw before leading to death, which gives the audience themselves catharsis. We feel the benefits of this. And if you have a tragic text as your second text, so we do the Duchess of Malfi at the moment, you can think about those tragic links and how the tragic structure follows in both of your texts. But it is also important to consider to what extent Paradise Lost is a tragedy. So we have a felix culpa, which is Latin for a happy fault. So even though we do have a tragedy, there are some really, really positive consequences of this tragedy. So though Milton regrets losing that innocent prelapsarian world of Eden, the fact that we have fallen gives us lots and lots of benefits which we have to recognise. So the necessity for moral struggle means that we have to prove ourselves to God. And Jesus obviously sacrificed himself in the biblical story to save our sins. So therefore we have this dialectical tension between what is tragic and actually the benefits of this, the happy faults of this fall. And like we've said, so for your comparison, think about tragic heroes, tragic fools, but also tragic shifts or drastic shifts in tone or atmosphere. So if we think about the Duchess of Malfi in that scene in Act 3, Scene 2, where the Duchess and Antonio are having a really domestic scene in her bedroom and they're joking round, Antonio and Cariola hide and want to jump out at the Duchess, and then Ferdinand enters and we see that complete shift. So you might also want to compare dramatic moments like that. The second quotation I want to look at then is sad task, yet argument not less, but more heroic. So again, Milton is describing his task of writing, his own process of writing, and he's saying that actually the argument that he's putting across, the story of the fall, is not less heroic than the Greek tragedies of Virgil and Homer, but it's more heroic. And this quotation then precedes a list of epics that Milton believes his tale is more heroic than, and he has this huge catalogue of all these tragic heroes that Adam is better than. And it includes, like we said, Greek tragedies, but also romances and other contemporary epics. And Milton argues that his is the Christian epic of our origins. It is a higher argument from God. And remember that Milton originally intended Paradise Lost to be a tragic play with the lovely title Adam Unparadised. So it's important to consider why he changed the genre, why he changed it to an epic. And Milton wanted to create this English Christian epic inspired by Homer and Virgil because he saw the Old Testament as the first part of human history, this great origin story, and he was specifically interested in how evil came into the world. And in order to elevate this, in order to make it more important, he copied lots and lots of these epic traditions. So we've talked about the catalogues and the epic similes, but also think about the language that he uses. So he almost Latinised the language to imitate the elevated, unrhymed but scanned style of classical Greek and Roman epics. And it is part of the oral tradition. So Homer's poems were intended to be sung, and Milton deliberately copied some of these narrative devices common to this style. And remember, Milton himself was blind, that we'll come to in a second, and he dictated this poem to his wife and daughters who transcribed it. So for him, it was something oral, and we can see that in the text. So for your comparison, think about comparing the genres of your two texts. So obviously we've got a poetry and a play. Who is the audience who would be watching or reading this, and how does that affect the writer's purpose? And the fact that plays are generally written to entertain, and this text seems to be to inform, obviously affects quite a lot of the purpose and the attitudes and the perspectives of these writers. Our final quotation from this section then is of my celestial patroness, who deigns her nightly visitations unimplored and dictates to me slumbering, or inspires easy my unpremeditated verse. So this is Milton talking about his celestial patroness, the angel who comes down and dictates these words to him. And just for that AO1 for our understanding of this quotation, it's interesting to compare Milton's unpremeditated verse with Satan's meditated guile, which is a quotation from the argument. So thought and manipulation of fallen traits if we're meditating and thinking and considering something, but Milton has this almost wholly unpremeditated verse. It's not thought out, it's not tainted by human touch, it is just holy and divine. And if we remember the quotation, the full quotation from Book 1 of Milton's Intention, he wanted to exert external providence and justify the ways of God to man. So this external providence, it's not coming from him internally, but these words are coming from God. And for our AO3, Milton claims that he was told this poem at night by Urania, who is a muse, an angelic muse, who in turn, as he was blind, dictated around 40 lines every morning to his wife or daughters to write down. And this is the implication that Milton is speaking with divine authority. He's almost a vessel for divine thought because these words are coming straight to him from God. And for our comparison, it's worth thinking about the purpose of your other text. Is it didactic, or is it interrogative? So, always mess up when it comes right to the end. So this text is obviously didactic. It aims to teach us the ways of God, whereas John Webster's The Duchess of Malfi is more interrogative. He wants to challenge social constructs and social hierarchy and consider what's right and wrong, rather than teaching us something explicitly. So, even though this is a really small part of the argument and lines 1 to 47, it's really, really key to think about Milton himself and about how his narration and how his purpose affects what we learn, what we're told, and how we're told it, and linking it to those contextual other epics and placing this in that epic tradition.